Emily Johnson stood at the checkout counter of a bustling grocery store, her heart pounding in her chest as she fumbled nervously with her wallet. Her two young children, Anna and Luke, stood quietly by her side, their innocent faces unaware of the growing anxiety in their mother's expression. The cashier, Clara, scanned each item with robotic precision, but Emily's thoughts were elsewhere, on the stack of bills piling up at home, the empty fridge, and the growing fear that she couldn't provide for her family. When the total flashed on the screen, Emily hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she slid her credit card through the machine, praying it would work. But the familiar words "transaction declined" flashed in red letters. Her stomach dropped. "Sorry, ma'am," Clara said, her voice cold and matter-of-fact, "but it's declined. You'll have to leave the groceries behind." Emily's face flushed with embarrassment. She tried again, swiping the card with shaking hands, but the result was the same. Her mind raced. There had to be enough money in the account. There had to be. But in that moment, it didn't matter. She could feel the eyes of the customers behind her, their impatience growing as they shifted from one foot to the other. The noise of the store conversations, shopping carts, the hum of fluorescent lights seemed to fade into a distant blur. The world around her continued, moving at a pace she couldn't keep up with. Clara, oblivious to Emily's panic, turned to the next customer, continuing the transaction without another word. I'm sorry," Emily stammered, her voice barely a whisper, her heart sinking into her stomach. "I don't know what happened. I can try again." But Clara didn't look up. "You don't have any other options," she said curtly, her tone dismissive. "You'll have to leave the cart." Emily's eyes burned with shame. The weight of the situation pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She could hear the soft giggles of her children, but they didn't understand. They didn't know why she felt like she was failing them. Emily stood frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the counter, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. Her mind raced as she thought about how she would explain this to Anna and Luke. What could she say? How could she make them understand that she simply didn't have enough? She didn't want them to see her like this, defeated, embarrassed, broken. But the words wouldn't come. She swallowed hard, feeling the sting of humiliation burn hotter with every passing second. Her cheeks were flushed, and her chest tightened with the weight of the moment. The other shoppers continued, oblivious to her suffering. She could feel the cold, indifferent stares of strangers around her, their lives continuing while hers seemed to be unraveling right before her eyes. Then, just as the heaviness of the moment became unbearable, a voice broke through the fog of her panic. "Is everything okay here?" Emily turned to see a man standing nearby, a man who had been quietly observing the scene. He was dressed casually, his presence unassuming, but there was something in the way he carried himself, something kind in his eyes. His voice was gentle, not demanding, just concerned. His question wasn't for her specifically, but seemed to acknowledge the struggle she was facing. I'm fine," Emily replied quickly, trying to compose herself, but the words felt empty. She wasn't fine. She was far from it. The man, who Emily didn't know but who somehow seemed to understand, stepped closer to the counter, giving her a reassuring nod. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. It was then that Emily noticed the slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips, but it wasn't a patronizing smile. It was a knowing one that suggested he understood more than he was letting on. He turned to Clara. "I'd like to cover the bill," he said simply, his words clear and confident. Clara glanced at him, then back at Emily, her expression unreadable. Without a word, she swiped his card and handed over the receipt. The groceries were paid for. Emily's mind reeled, her emotions warring within her. She had no idea who this man was or why he had stepped in, but in that moment, he had offered her something far more important than money. He had given her dignity. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she fought them back, not wanting to break down in front of her children. She turned to thank him, but the man had already started to walk away, blending into the crowd. Before he disappeared, he turned back to her. "Don't let this define you," he said quietly, his voice full of compassion. "There's no shame in needing help sometimes." Emily stood frozen, her heart swelling with gratitude, but also with a deep sense of awe. Who was he? And why had he helped her? But it didn't matter. In that moment, everything changed. She could still feel the weight of her struggles, but she also felt a spark of hope that she hadn't known she needed. As she turned to her children, who were still oblivious to the exchange, Emily felt a renewed sense of strength. For the first time in a long while, she realized that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, from strangers, from kind gestures, and from moments of compassion that have the power to lift us from the depths of our own shame and struggle. As the line at the grocery store grew longer, Emily stood at the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to shuffle through her purse. The price of the items before her seemed to mock her as she fumbled for the last few coins, a knot forming in her stomach with each passing second. She had promised herself she would never let anyone see her struggle, but today, standing in front of the cashier, her pride was crumbling. She had never been in this situation before, never had to count the pennies in her wallet, let alone struggle to pay for groceries she needed to feed her family. Her face flushed with embarrassment, and she felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the other customers behind her, the weight of their silent judgment heavy on her shoulders. Clara, the cashier, was patient, but Emily could see the sympathy in her eyes. The awkward silence between them seemed to stretch on endlessly, and in that moment, it felt like the world had stopped, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Just as she was about to give up, embarrassed beyond belief, she heard a calm voice from behind her. "Excuse me," the voice said, gentle but firm, "is everything okay?" Emily turned, startled, to find a man in a suit standing next to her. His presence was commanding, but there was something warm and compassionate about the way he spoke. He smiled softly, and Emily realized, almost too late, who he was. "I'm James," he said, "the owner of this store." His gaze was steady, unjudging, and for a moment, Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was he there to reprimand her for holding up the line? Was he angry that she hadn't paid for her items yet? But instead, James's next words surprised her. He gently placed his hand on the counter and added, "I'd like to pay for your groceries today." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief, her breath catching in her throat. Was this really happening? Her first instinct was to refuse, to insist that she could manage on her own, but the sincerity in his eyes made it hard to speak. She had never imagined someone in his position would step forward to offer such a gesture of kindness, especially not in front of a crowd. She shook her head, still trying to process the offer. "No, I can't accept that," she stammered, the shame and pride warring within her. "I can pay for it. I just need a minute." But James was unwavering. He smiled warmly, as if reassuring her that there was nothing to be embarrassed about. "Everyone faces hardships, Emily," he said, his voice low and understanding. "No one should ever feel ashamed of their financial situation. Sometimes, life gets tough, and that's okay." His words, so simple yet so powerful, began to break through the walls of pride and embarrassment that had kept her silent. Emily stood there, stunned, as the weight of his kindness sank in. This wasn't just a gesture to cover the cost of her groceries, it was an acknowledgement of her struggle, a quiet reminder that she was not alone. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not for what she could afford, not for how much she could buy, but for who she was as a person. Her hesitation melted away, and without saying another word, she nodded and allowed James to pay. As he swiped his card and the transaction went through, a deep sense of relief washed over her. It wasn't just the financial burden being lifted, it was the emotional weight, the exhaustion of carrying her worries alone, that she could finally let go of, even if only for a moment. She looked at James, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also with something else, something she hadn't realized she needed until now: hope. James's smile was genuine, and as he handed her the receipt, he leaned in a little closer and whispered, "Take care of yourself. Life has a way of working out when we allow kindness to come into it." Emily smiled back, the first real smile she had given all day, and in that simple exchange, something shifted inside her. As she gathered her bags, Clara caught her eye and offered a soft, knowing smile, silently acknowledging the moment that had just unfolded. It wasn't just a gesture of kindness from a man in a suit, it was a reminder that the world wasn't as cold and indifferent as it sometimes felt. There were people, like James, who still saw the humanity in others, who understood that life could be difficult, but that kindness had the power to heal. Emily left the store that day with her groceries, but she also left with something much more valuable: an understanding that, in times of hardship, there were moments of grace, moments when the pressure of the world could be lightened by a simple act of generosity. And as for James, his simple act of kindness had done more than pay for her groceries. It had rekindled a sense of hope, a spark that reminded her that, no matter how difficult things got, there was always room for compassion, always room for people to lift each other up. As Emily made her way out of the grocery store, clutching the bag of groceries that no longer felt like a burden but a gift, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. The kindness of the man who had paid for her items, the CEO of the store chain, as he had revealed, lingered in her mind, but it felt so surreal. She kept replaying the moment in her head, trying to make sense of it all. She had never expected something like this, certainly not in her current situation. The weight of her struggles, the long hours at work, the sleepless nights worrying about her daughter, Clara, and the mounting bills had kept her feeling isolated, like she was invisible to the world. But today, for a brief moment, she was seen. She didn't even know the man's name at first, but his words had made an impact. When he revealed that he was James, the CEO of the very grocery store she had been shopping at, Emily's heart skipped a beat. It took her a few seconds to register what he had just said, the words almost not making sense in her tired brain. "Wait," she had said, looking up at him in confusion, "you're the CEO?" James had smiled, a calm, genuine smile that didn't feel rehearsed or fake. "Yes," he said simply, nodding. "I know this might be a bit of a surprise, but I want you to know that I didn't do this for publicity or any kind of attention. I did it because I care." Emily was taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. She had spent so many years assuming that people like James, people with power, wealth, and influence, only saw her as a number, a face in the crowd, a person whose struggles were invisible and irrelevant. But James's words shattered that illusion, creating a space for something different, something that she hadn't allowed herself to believe in for a long time: empathy. "I've seen too many people struggle quietly," James continued, his tone gentle, but firm with conviction. And I understand how it feels to feel like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I don't want anyone who comes into my store to feel like they are invisible. I want them to know they matter. That's why I did what I did. Emily stood there for a moment, her heart racing. She had always felt like she was fighting alone, scraping by, taking whatever she could get. It never occurred to her that someone in his position, someone who seemed so far removed from her world, would truly care about people like her. But here was James, a man who clearly understood hardship and who wasn't content to sit in his office making decisions for people he didn't know. He had taken the time to make a difference, to show compassion in a way that went beyond simple charity. James's words were like a balm for Emily's soul, soothing the wounds of years of self-doubt, guilt, and frustration. She had never thought that someone like him would see her, really see her, and understand what she was going through. But in that moment, he did. "You have no idea how much this means to me," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been struggling, and I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in." James shook his head. "You don't need to thank me," he said, his eyes full of compassion. "I just want you to know that you're not alone in this. And I want you to know that, as the CEO, I have the power to make sure that the people who work for me, who shop in my stores, and who are part of this community are treated with respect. I don't want anyone to feel like they're less than. We all deserve kindness." Emily could feel the walls she had built around herself begin to crack, piece by piece. She had spent so long trying to do everything on her own, convincing herself that asking for help made her weak. But in James's eyes, she didn't see judgment. She saw understanding. She saw a person who, despite his position of power, cared about her well-being and wanted to make the world a little easier for people like her. As they talked, James shared stories about how he had grown up with a deep sense of empathy, raised by parents who taught him to always put people first. He spoke of the struggles he faced early in his career, the moments when he felt completely overwhelmed, and how those experiences shaped the way he ran his business. "I know that for people like you, the ones who work hard every day and still don't have enough to get by, it can feel like the system is rigged against you," James admitted. "But it's not just about business and numbers, it's about people. You, your daughter, and everyone else who walks through these doors." Emily, hearing his story, felt a flicker of hope. It was a rare thing for her to feel this way hopeful, even in the face of everything she had been struggling with. It was as if this small act of kindness had opened her eyes to a new reality, one where people in power didn't always have to remain distant and indifferent. The conversation ended, but the impact lingered. As Emily left the store, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but she knew that one person's kindness had changed the way she saw the world and maybe even the way she saw herself. James had shown her that real leadership came not from authority or wealth, but from understanding and compassion. And that, more than anything, was what truly made a difference in the lives of people like her. Emily stood frozen for a moment, her mind struggling to process the kindness that had just been offered to her. The words James had spoken seemed too good to be true, and yet, as she looked at him, she knew he meant every word. The relief that washed over her was almost too much to bear, and her chest tightened as she tried to steady her breath. With a voice thick with emotion, she thanked him repeatedly, her gratitude spilling out in shaky syllables. She could hardly believe the way her life had shifted in the span of a few minutes. It was as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had suddenly been lifted. She had been so used to struggling alone, doing everything she could to make ends meet as a single mother, that the thought of someone offering her help without hesitation was foreign and overwhelming. Emily had spent years battling the shame that came with asking for assistance, hiding her hardships from others as best as she could. She worked tirelessly, putting in long hours at a job that barely paid the bills, while juggling the demands of raising her child on her own. Every day felt like a relentless cycle of pushing through, always pretending she had everything under control when, in reality, she was exhausted emotionally, physically, and financially drained. Her pride had kept her from reaching out for help. The idea of appearing weak or incapable was something she could not bear, especially as a mother who was supposed to have it all together. But now, as she stood in front of James, the walls she had built up over the years began to crumble. Her voice caught in her throat as she spoke, explaining her situation to him in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do before. She told him about the sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, the sacrifices she had made to ensure her child had everything they needed, and the constant fear that one misstep could send everything spiraling. Each word felt like a release, a small but important moment of vulnerability that she had been too afraid to show before. James listened to her quietly, never interrupting, his eyes filled with empathy. His presence was steady, comforting, and in that moment, Emily realized that he wasn't just offering her financial support, he was offering her something far more valuable, understanding. It was as though, for the first time in a long while, someone truly saw her not just as a mother doing the best she could, but as a person worthy of compassion and care. His assurance that no one should ever feel ashamed for facing hard times resonated deeply with her, striking a chord in a place she hadn't known was so raw. She had always carried the weight of her struggles in silence, hiding behind the mask of self-sufficiency, but now she understood that it was okay to let down her guard. It was okay to admit that she didn't have all the answers, that she needed help sometimes. She felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years, as if for the first time, she could see the possibility of things getting better. James's kindness was a reminder that there was still goodness in the world, and that despite the difficulties she faced, there were people who genuinely cared. This small gesture, this simple act of compassion, meant more to her than he could ever know. It gave her a sense of relief that she didn't realize she had been craving, a feeling that everything might be okay, that she wasn't alone in her struggle. As she stood there, a soft sob escaped her, though it wasn't one of sadness. It was a release of emotions she had kept buried for so long. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected someone to notice her in the way James had. His words were a balm to her weary soul, a confirmation that kindness still existed, even in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. For a brief moment, the weight of her responsibilities didn't seem so heavy. She could breathe again. She felt seen. Emily wiped the tears from her eyes, her gratitude growing stronger with each passing second. She realized, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that she wasn't weak for accepting help. In fact, it took more strength to open up and allow herself to receive kindness than it did to constantly pretend everything was fine. And that realization, though small, was a turning point for her. She had always thought that to be strong, she had to carry everything on her own, that asking for help was a sign of failure. But James had shown her otherwise. He had shown her that strength wasn't about doing everything yourself, it was about allowing others to walk alongside you when the road gets tough. She looked at James, her heart full of gratitude, and whispered a final thank you, her voice steadier now. He smiled warmly, his eyes kind, and assured her once again that this was nothing more than a small gesture, one that he would offer to anyone in need. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of brighter days ahead. The future, though uncertain, felt a little less daunting. And as she walked away from that conversation, a flicker of hope ignited within her, a hope that would carry her forward, knowing that sometimes, all it takes is one person's kindness to change everything. James sat in his office, staring out the window, the weight of the day's events pressing down on him. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily, the woman who had stood before him with a look of desperation in her eyes. The interaction had been brief, but the impact of that moment rippled through his thoughts. He had watched her try to pay for her groceries, only for her card to be declined. Her cheeks had flushed with embarrassment, and she had fumbled for another form of payment, but nothing seemed to work. The frustration and helplessness had been palpable, and James had felt the rawness of her vulnerability in a way that shook him. As he replayed the moment, it struck him how often people found themselves in situations like Emily's, people who, for one reason or another, were struggling financially, emotionally, or mentally, yet had to face the judgment of others when they reached out for help. It wasn't just Emily's situation that troubled him, it was the realization that these were not isolated events. In the midst of his busy grocery stores, where customers lined up daily to buy food, he had never truly stopped to think about the stories of those customers, their struggles, their burdens, their needs beyond the simple exchange of money for goods. His stores had been built to serve the community, yes, but somehow, in the rush of business and numbers, he had overlooked the emotional side of that service. He had never considered what it meant for someone to feel vulnerable in a public space, especially when they were already facing personal challenges. As he reflected on Emily, he realized that her experience had been a mirror for something bigger. His company, in its effort to provide convenience and service, had unknowingly built walls between itself and the very people it was supposed to serve. The impersonal, transactional nature of the grocery store had left little room for empathy, for understanding the deeper struggles that customers faced. James had been so focused on sales, profit margins, and efficiency that he had missed the human side of his business. In a quiet moment of clarity, James made a decision. He knew he couldn't let Emily's experience be just another isolated incident that passed by unnoticed. He wanted to create a space where no one would feel like they were walking into a store to be judged or dismissed. His mind began to race with ideas. What if he could change the way his employees interacted with customers, making sure they were always mindful of the humanity behind every transaction? What if he could train his team to recognize when someone was struggling not just with money, but with life, and offer them support, without making them feel embarrassed or ashamed? It wasn't just about offering a discount or a payment plan. It was about treating every customer with the dignity and respect they deserved, regardless of their financial situation. It was about fostering an environment where people could feel comfortable asking for help, knowing they wouldn't be met with disdain or judgment. James knew that this change had to come from the top down, and it had to be embedded in the culture of the company. It would be a long road to shift the mindset of his employees, to move beyond the standard policies and procedures, and to instill a sense of empathy into every aspect of the business. But as he thought more about Emily, about the quiet shame in her eyes and the way her voice faltered, he realized that the change had to start now. He wouldn't wait for another incident to push him into action. His company, which had always prided itself on being a staple in the community, would now focus on being a place of understanding, support, and kindness. James picked up the phone and called his senior management team. He knew that this would be a challenge, but he also knew it was a challenge worth taking on. He shared his vision with them, explaining how every employee, whether they worked in the checkout line, the deli section, or the produce aisle, needed to be trained to understand the human side of their work. They would be taught how to approach customers who might be struggling, how to offer a helping hand without making anyone feel less than. He spoke about creating a new initiative, one that focused on empathy and compassion as core values of the company. He envisioned a customer service model where employees were not just problem solvers but emotional supporters, able to listen without judgment and offer solutions that were not just financial but also emotional. He also realized that this wouldn't be an overnight shift. It would require patience, training, and a commitment to change. But as he spoke to his team, he could hear the passion in his own voice, a passion born out of his desire to right the wrongs he had only just recognized. Emily's encounter had opened his eyes to something that had been hiding in plain sight, and he was determined not to let her story be forgotten. The changes wouldn't just benefit customers, they would benefit his entire team as well, by creating a workplace where empathy and kindness weren't just buzzwords, but values that guided every decision. As he hung up the phone, James felt a weight lift off his chest, replaced by a sense of purpose. He had seen the problem, now, he was going to fix it. His grocery stores would no longer just serve the community with food, they would serve it with understanding, respect, and the kind of human connection that made people feel valued, no matter their circumstances. And in doing so, he would ensure that no customer, like Emily, would ever feel ashamed to ask for help again. It was a small but significant step toward building a future where businesses weren't just about profits, but about people. James sat at his desk, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on his chest. He had built his company from the ground up, proud of the brand and the success it had achieved, but as he looked out over the bustling city from his office window, a deep sense of unease settled in. The world was changing, and so were the needs of his customers. More and more, he heard stories of families struggling, of parents choosing between paying bills and buying groceries, of people who were doing everything they could just to make ends meet. The thought weighed on him, and it became impossible to ignore. His company, a place where people came for goods and services, could do more than just exchange products for money. It could be a place of support, a place where customers didn't feel judged or ashamed for their financial struggles. After weeks of careful planning and consultations with his team, James crafted a new initiative that he hoped would not only help those in need but would change the way businesses interacted with their communities. He introduced a discreet support program, designed to offer assistance to families facing financial hardship. This new initiative provided flexible payment options, discounts on essential items, and, most importantly, a safe, no questions asked environment where customers could access help without fear of embarrassment or judgment. It wasn't just about offering discounts, it was about fostering a sense of humanity and care that went beyond a transaction. James wanted people to feel that his stores were places where they could find help and understanding, where their dignity would be preserved no matter their circumstances. As the program rolled out, James wasn't sure what to expect. He knew that his initiative would be met with some resistance. There would always be skeptics, and there would be those who questioned whether such a program could work. But what he didn't expect was the overwhelming response from both customers and employees. Families who had been struggling for months, sometimes even years, expressed their gratitude. They shared stories of the immense relief they felt knowing that they could now access the products and services they needed without the crushing anxiety of how they would pay for them. Parents with children in need of school supplies, elderly individuals on fixed incomes, and workers between jobs all found solace in the program, grateful for the dignity it restored and the support it provided. They were no longer invisible or overlooked. As James walked through his stores, he saw the change firsthand. Employees, who had previously been focused solely on transactions, began engaging with customers in a new way, offering assistance, providing options and fostering an atmosphere of genuine care. It was a ripple effect. The staff saw that the company's new initiative wasn't just about financial support, it was about creating a culture of empathy and understanding. The company's mission was no longer just about turning a profit, it was about making a tangible difference in the lives of those who walked through the doors. And that change was palpable. James watched his employees come to life in ways they hadn't before. Many of them had experienced financial struggles of their own, and now, they were able to make a real impact in people's lives, offering a hand when it was needed most. The initiative allowed them to connect with customers in a more personal way, creating bonds that extended beyond the typical customer-provider relationship. The trust and respect that had been built between James and his team were now extending outward to the customers they served. As the weeks went on, James began receiving letters, emails, and messages of gratitude. People shared their stories of how the program had helped them regain a sense of hope and stability, of how it had taken away some of the fear they lived with on a daily basis. One mother wrote about how the flexibility of the payment options had allowed her to continue providing for her children without having to choose between buying food and paying bills. Another customer, a college student, explained how the program had kept her from dropping out of school due to financial pressure. These stories touched James deeply. He had always believed in the power of business to drive change, but he hadn't anticipated the profound emotional impact that this initiative would have. It wasn't just about sales or profit margins, it was about people. It was about making sure that everyone, no matter their background or financial situation, could feel supported and respected. As he read these letters, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his decision to act had created ripples of positive change in so many lives. James knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. There would still be challenges, and not everyone would understand the full impact of what he was trying to do. But for the first time in a long while, he felt certain that he was on the right path. The initiative wasn't just a business strategy, it was a reflection of his values. He wanted his company to be more than just a place to shop, it should be a place of community, of kindness, and of support. And as he watched his employees embrace this new vision, he knew that together, they had created something truly special. Something that went beyond sales or products, and into the hearts of the people they served. The program was just the beginning, and James felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue expanding this mission of empathy, support, and change. As the weeks passed, the impact of James's new initiative began to ripple outward, spreading through the community in ways no one could have anticipated. It all started with a simple yet profound change within the store, where James had made it his mission to foster an environment of empathy, understanding, and kindness. Employees, who had once been just co-workers, began to see each other as a team, a true family, and this shift in mindset created a warm, inviting atmosphere that customers couldn't help but notice. For the first time, the store was not just a place to shop, but a sanctuary where people felt valued, heard, and supported. Among the most noticeable changes were the customers who had previously felt marginalized or ashamed, those who were struggling silently and felt uncomfortable asking for help. Many of them had long avoided the store, either because they were too embarrassed to speak up or because they had never felt welcomed. But now, things were different. The energy in the store was undeniably positive, and word spread quickly. Customers who had once walked in hesitantly, heads down, now entered with their shoulders squared, ready to ask questions and seek the assistance they needed. They felt empowered by the new atmosphere, no longer afraid to ask for help or to express their concerns. Whether it was about a product, a service, or simply how to navigate an issue they had faced for months, they now felt comfortable enough to reach out, knowing that their voices would be heard without judgment. The store had transformed into a place where individuals were not only welcomed but encouraged to seek solutions and support. This shift was a direct result of James's leadership and the changes he had implemented. By fostering a culture of empathy and understanding, he had created an environment where his employees felt the freedom to connect with customers in a more personal and caring way. For the staff, this transformation was not just a superficial change, it was a shift in how they saw their roles. They were no longer just there to complete tasks or fulfill customer orders. They were there to make a difference, to show kindness, and to provide assistance wherever it was needed. This sense of purpose resonated deeply with the employees, who now felt a greater sense of pride in their work. They took the time to listen to customers, offering genuine help with a smile and a sincere willingness to make things right. No longer was there a rush to check off a to-do list or merely push products. Instead, the focus was on creating an experience where people felt heard and supported. The ripple effect spread not only within the store but outward into the broader community. Families in need, whether emotionally, financially, or mentally, found refuge in this newfound culture. They came to see the store as more than just a place to buy goods. It became a space where they could go when they needed more than a transaction, they needed a community. For single parents struggling to make ends meet, for families dealing with hardship, the store became a place of hope. Employees reached out with empathy, offering support that went beyond the call of duty, whether it was by sharing local resources for help, offering discounts in difficult times, or simply offering a listening ear when it was needed most. The customers began to return with greater frequency, not just for the products but for the sense of community they had come to trust and appreciate. It became a safe haven, a reminder that, even in times of struggle, there were places where kindness prevailed. James's leadership had sparked this change, but it was the employees who had taken ownership of it, understanding that their actions had the power to transform someone's day, or even their life. Every small act of kindness, the employee who helped a mother load groceries into her car, the staff member who checked in on a regular customer struggling with health issues, or the cashier who went out of her way to find a missing item, had a ripple effect that touched countless lives. As the store became known for its generosity, its walls seemed to exude a sense of compassion that made everyone who entered feel like they belonged. It was a place where no one was judged, no matter their background, their struggles, or their appearance. This change had far-reaching consequences. Families who had been overlooked or dismissed in the past were now respected and embraced, leading to a sense of empowerment they had never experienced before. Children witnessed the kindness their parents had longed for, and for many, it instilled a sense of hope and confidence they had never thought possible. Employees, too, felt empowered. They were part of something larger than themselves, something that transcended the regular grind of work. They were contributing to a community of care and support, and in doing so, they were growing as individuals and professionals. James's leadership and the changes he put into motion had created not just a better workplace but a stronger, more compassionate community. The store had become a symbol of change, a beacon of hope in a world that so often felt divided and indifferent. What started as a simple initiative to improve the work environment had blossomed into something extraordinary. It had become a place where people could come together, share their stories, and offer support in a world that sometimes felt too harsh. The ripple effect that had begun in the store spread out into the larger community, sparking a movement of kindness that touched lives in ways both big and small. It wasn't just about the products on the shelves, it was about the people who walked through the doors, people who now felt valued, respected, and empowered. And that, perhaps, was the most profound change of all. After the incident at the grocery store, Emily's life began to shift in ways she had never imagined. At that moment, she felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude, a deep sense of thankfulness that something had finally changed in her life, something she couldn't quite explain at first. For so long, she had carried the weight of her struggles alone, convinced that she was barely keeping it all together. But the support from James's initiative gave her something that had been missing, a sense of hope, and more importantly, a renewed belief in her own ability to overcome the challenges she faced every day. It wasn't just about the financial assistance that had come her way, it was about the emotional transformation that came with it. Emily had always been fiercely independent, but the pressure of balancing a full-time job while raising two young children on a tight budget had slowly worn her down. She had convinced herself that asking for help was a sign of weakness, that needing others was something to be ashamed of. But the initiative James led showed her that asking for help wasn't a burden, it was an act of courage. For the first time in a long while, Emily didn't feel like she was on the edge of exhaustion, struggling to manage her home, her job, and her finances. The support she received allowed her to breathe again, to take a step back and focus on the things that truly mattered, her children's well-being and her own mental health. The relief she felt was indescribable, but what truly made a difference was how it empowered her to start making better choices for herself and her family. With the financial assistance and resources available through the program, Emily was able to catch up on overdue bills and provide more for her children. She no longer felt the constant, gnawing worry of whether she would have enough money for groceries at the end of the week, or whether she would be able to pay rent on time. Instead, she could plan, even if only a little bit, for the future. It was a small but significant change, and it gave her a sense of control over her life that she hadn't felt in years. But perhaps the most profound shift was in how Emily began to view herself. Where once there had been feelings of guilt and inadequacy, now there was self-compassion and understanding. She no longer blamed herself for the circumstances she found herself in. The program showed her that everyone faces difficult times, and that seeking help was not a reflection of failure, but rather a sign of strength. This realization was pivotal. Emily had always put others first, her children, her job, her family, but for the first time, she was learning to put herself on equal footing. She began to understand that in order to care for her children, she needed to care for herself first. This shift in mindset made her more present with her kids, more patient, and more engaged. She found herself laughing more often, playing with them without the constant distraction of financial worries, and simply enjoying the moments they shared. The weight of her stress had lifted, and it allowed her to show up in her life in ways that felt authentic and fulfilling. As Emily continued to receive support, she realized that her experience wasn't unique, it was something that many people in her community were struggling with. She saw others around her, working multiple jobs, juggling responsibilities, and feeling overwhelmed, just as she had once felt. Emily knew that she had to pay it forward. She became a vocal advocate for the program that had transformed her life, sharing her story with others in hopes of inspiring them to take advantage of the same support she had received. She spoke at community meetings, shared her experience on social media, and encouraged her friends and neighbors to seek help when they needed it. In doing so, Emily not only found a new purpose but also created a sense of connection with others who were facing similar struggles. She became a beacon of hope, showing others that they didn't have to face their challenges alone. Her vulnerability, her willingness to share her journey, empowered others to do the same. And in return, she found a community of people who understood her struggles, who offered their own support, and who lifted each other up. What started as a personal transformation for Emily became a movement of collective strength. The more she advocated for the program, the more she realized that the support system wasn't just about financial relief, it was about creating a culture of empathy, understanding, and solidarity. Emily's story spread beyond her immediate circle, reaching individuals who had felt isolated, just as she had. She became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that change was possible, that support was available, and that there was always hope, even in the darkest moments. As Emily's life continued to improve, she looked back at the moment in the grocery store, the moment when everything had seemed impossible, and realized just how far she had come. Her journey wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, growing, and helping others do the same. She had gone from feeling powerless to becoming a voice of strength and support, and she would continue to advocate for those who needed it most. Emily's story had become a testament to the power of community, compassion, and the ability to rise above life's toughest challenges. James had always prided himself on being a successful businessman, but it wasn't until he made a decision driven by compassion that he truly understood the power of leadership. It started with Emily, a cashier at one of his grocery stores, who was struggling under the weight of personal hardship. When James noticed the toll it was taking on her performance and well-being, he did something most leaders might overlook: he took the time to understand her story. Emily wasn't just an employee to James, she was a person, facing real-life challenges that needed empathy, not just a solution to improve her numbers. Instead of reprimanding her for what some would consider a decline in work performance, James offered her support, listening to her concerns and offering the resources she needed to get back on track. It wasn't just a gesture, it was the beginning of something much larger. James's decision to treat Emily as a person first, not just an employee, sparked a movement within his company. As he reflected on how a simple act of compassion had helped Emily regain her confidence and sense of purpose, he realized that the culture of his entire organization could benefit from this approach. The focus had always been on maximizing profits and efficiency, but James understood that true success lies in valuing people, not just their productivity, but their well-being, their dignity, and their humanity. Over time, this realization turned into action. James implemented company-wide changes, shifting the corporate ethos from one that prioritized profits above all else to one that centered on empathy and respect. He made it clear to all his employees that kindness, understanding, and mutual support would now be the cornerstone of the company's mission. The ripple effect was profound. Emily, who had once been struggling in silence, became a leader in the store, using her experience to guide others through difficult times. Her transformation was not just a personal victory, it was a testament to the power of compassion and the change it could inspire in others. The new focus on people over profits didn't mean sacrificing the success of the company. In fact, it led to a remarkable improvement in morale and performance. Employees who had once felt undervalued began to feel empowered, and their renewed sense of purpose translated into better customer service, higher job satisfaction, and increased retention. The customers, too, noticed the difference. The stores no longer felt like transactional environments, they felt like communities, where employees were genuinely invested in helping people. Whether it was a warm smile, a thoughtful gesture, or a willingness to go the extra mile, the employees began to embody the values of empathy that James had championed. Word spread quickly, and the company gained a reputation as a compassionate and supportive place to work and shop. James watched with pride as his stores became known not just for their great products, but for their commitment to kindness and respect. People no longer viewed the company as just a business, they saw it as a reflection of the values it upheld. James knew that the success of this movement wasn't just about the changes in policy or the shift in company culture, it was about the lives he had touched and the lasting impact of choosing empathy over expedience. Behind the scenes, James continued to work tirelessly, making sure the company stayed true to its new values. He didn't rest on the laurels of success. Instead, he sought ways to keep improving, ensuring that empathy wasn't just a buzzword but a core principle that was ingrained in every aspect of the company. He regularly checked in with employees at all levels, making sure they felt heard and supported. His leadership wasn't just about strategy or numbers, it was about ensuring that kindness remained at the heart of everything they did. As the company grew and expanded, James's commitment to empathy and compassion remained unwavering. The initiative he had started, driven by a single decision to help one person, had blossomed into a movement that transformed the entire organization. It became a model for other businesses, proving that success could be achieved without sacrificing humanity. James felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had created a workplace where people didn't just come to work, they came to be part of something bigger than themselves. They came to contribute to a culture where kindness wasn't just a nice thing to do, it was the standard. When James looked back on his journey, he realized that it was one decision, one moment of empathy that had sparked the transformation. Helping Emily wasn't just about offering support to an individual, it was about creating a culture that recognized the inherent value of every person. His legacy wasn't just the success of his company, it was the impact he had on the lives of his employees and customers, a reminder that when you lead with compassion, the possibilities for growth and connection are endless. In the end, James knew that the company's true success wasn't measured in profits or accolades, it was measured in the lives it had touched, the positive change it had created, and the enduring legacy of compassion that would live on long after the company's doors had closed each night.